Airports are places of movement, not belonging. Thousands of people pass through them every hour, yet somehow, some are always made to feel like they don't belong. Gate B-17 buzzed with the low hum of rolling suitcases, murmured conversations, and the occasional metallic chime of boarding announcements echoing through the terminal. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, casting long reflections across the polished floor. To most travelers, it was just another flight, another delay, another line. But for Dr. Naomi Carter, this moment would become something else entirely. She stood quietly near the boarding line, a slim leather backpack resting on her shoulder, her phone clasped loosely in her hand. She wore no designer labels, no flashy jewelry, just a charcoal gray blazer, dark jeans, and flats worn comfortable from travel. Her hair was natural, pulled back neatly, calm, composed, invisible. At least, that's how they saw her. The boarding sign flashed Group 2. Now board. Naomi stepped forward. Before she could reach the scanner, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Ma'am, step aside." She turned slowly. Standing in front of her was a uniformed airline supervisor, crisp navy jacket, gold stripes on the shoulders, posture stiff with authority. Her name badge read Karen Whitmore, lead flight supervisor. Karen's eyes flicked down to Naomi's boarding pass, then back up to her face. A pause, a look. Something changed. "I'm going to need you to step out of the line," Karen said, her tone polite on the surface, cold underneath. Naomi blinked. "Is there a problem?" Karen forced a smile. "We're having verification issues." Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably. A white businessman adjusted his watch. A young couple leaned closer, curious. Phones subtly lifted. Naomi glanced at her boarding pass. Everything was in order. "Verification of what, exactly?" she asked. Karen lowered her voice. "This seat is in first class, and we've had issues with passengers attempting to board in the wrong cabin." There it was, the unspoken accusation hanging in the air. Naomi inhaled slowly. "I fly first class frequently. There's no mistake." Karen's smile tightened. "Still, I'll need you to step aside." A man behind Naomi sighed loudly. "Come on! Some of us have places to be." Naomi stepped out of line, not because she was wrong, but because she understood something most people didn't. Sometimes, compliance exposes the truth faster than resistance. Karen motioned to a nearby desk. "Wait here." Naomi stood alone as the line moved forward without her. Passenger after passenger boarded. None stopped. None questioned why she had been pulled aside, except one. An elderly black man seated nearby watched closely, his jaw tightening. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself decades ago. Karen tapped aggressively at the keyboard, her brow furrowed. Naomi remained silent. Minutes passed. Karen tried again. Then again. Her confident posture faltered. She cleared her throat. "What was your name again?" "Dr. Naomi Carter," Naomi replied evenly. Karen typed it, then froze. Her face drained of color. She leaned closer to the screen, as if it might change if she stared hard enough. It didn't. Behind her, another airline employee glanced over her shoulder. "What's wrong?" he whispered. Karen swallowed. Nothing. But her hands were shaking now. The employee leaned closer. His eyes widened. "Oos." The energy shifted. Karen straightened abruptly and laughed nervously. "Ooh, looks like the system lagged." "Everything's fine." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Second board now." Karen hesitated. Before she could answer, a voice boomed from behind them. "Actually, I think we should pause boarding." Everyone turned. A man in a tailored suit approached, flanked by two executives. His presence alone commanded attention. Conversations stopped. Phones lifted openly now. Karen's face went pale. "Mr. Reynolds," she stammered. I didn't know you were on this flight." The man's gaze never left Naomi. "I wasn't," he said, "but I received an alert." He turned to her, eyes filled not with anger but disappointment. "Dr. Carter," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." A collective gasp rippled through the gate. Karen looked between them, confused. "You know each other?" Naomi nodded slightly. "This is Evan Reynolds," she said calmly, "chairman of the board." Karen's knees nearly buckled. Evan turned to the surrounding passengers. "For those watching, this woman is not just a passenger. She's the majority shareholder and CEO of this airline. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Unavoidable. Phones recorded everything now. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Naomi finally spoke, not loudly, not angrily, but with a calm that cut deeper than shouting ever could. I was denied boarding, she said, despite having a valid ticket. I was questioned, singled out, humiliated, and none of you intervened. Her eyes swept over the crowd. Not one. She turned back to Karen. You didn't verify my boarding pass because you suspected an error, Naomi continued. You did it because you couldn't reconcile who you think belongs in first class with how I look. Karen's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean. Naomi raised a hand. Intent does not erase impact. Security had arrived now. Executives whispered urgently. Naomi took a step forward, her voice steady. For 5 minutes, I was just another black woman being told she didn't belong. And that's exactly why this matters. She turned to Evan. I want a full report. Names, footage, training logs, and I want every passenger here to receive an apology, not from her but from the company. Evan nodded. It will be done. Karen was escorted away, her authority stripped in seconds. Boarding resumed, but the mood had changed. Passengers avoided Naomi's gaze, ashamed. As Naomi finally walked down the jet bridge, the elderly black man stood and softly clapped. Then another, then another. Soon, the entire gate echoed with applause, no celebratory, but acknowledging recognition. Naomi paused, turned back, and spoke one final time. Representation doesn't end racism, she said. Accountability does. She boarded the plane, and the doors closed behind her. The cabin was quieter than usual, not the peaceful quiet of a smooth flight, but the kind that settles after something uncomfortable has happened and no one knows how to act normal again. Naomi took her seat in first class, seat 2A, the same seat that, minutes earlier, had apparently been too good for her. She placed her bag under the seat, buckled in, and looked straight ahead. Her expression was composed, but inside, her mind was moving fast, cataloging every detail, every face, every second. Across the aisle, a woman pretended to scroll on her phone, stealing glances at Naomi between swipes. 2 rows back, a man leaned toward his wife and whispered something. The flight attendant paused longer than necessary while offering Naomi water, her hands trembling slightly. Still or sparkling? She asked. Still, please, Naomi replied gently. The attendant nodded, relief flickering across her face at the kindness she hadn't expected. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Naomi closed her eyes, not to rest, but to breathe. Moments like this always dragged her backward, to a time before boardrooms and shareholder meetings, to a 10-year-old girl standing in an airport with her father. She remembered his hand gripping hers tightly as a security agent stopped them. Random check, the man had said. They were always random. Her father had smiled politely, raised his arms, complied. Later, in the car, he'd said nothing, just stared at the road a little harder than usual. That was the day Naomi learned something critical. Success would never make her invisible to bias, only prepared. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice came on, noticeably tense. Before we reach cruising altitude, we have a brief announcement from corporate leadership. Murmurs rippled through the plane. Naomi opened her eyes. Evan Reynolds stood at the front of the cabin, one hand resting on a seat for balance. He looked older than usual. He looked shaken. Thank you for your attention, he began. What occurred at the gate today was unacceptable. It does not reflect our values, and it does not reflect the future of this airline. He paused, choosing his words carefully. We are launching an immediate internal investigation. Mandatory bias retraining will be enforced across all departments. And effective today, boarding denial decisions will require dual authorization and documented cause. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the generic apology they were used to. This had teeth. Evan turned slightly, his gaze landing on Naomi. And to Dr. Carter, on behalf of the company, I apologize. The words hung in the air. Naomi nodded once. Not forgiveness. Acknowledgement. The plane lifted into the sky, the city shrinking beneath them. At 35,000 feet, the world always looked smaller, cleaner. as if distance could erase what happened on the ground. It couldn't. Halfway through the flight, Naomi stood and walked calmly toward the galley. Conversations stopped as she passed. She didn't rush. She didn't avoid eye contact. She didn't need to. Near the rear of first class, she noticed the elderly black man from the gate seated alone. He looked up, surprised when she stopped beside him. "Sir," Naomi said softly. "Thank you." He smiled, eyes shining. "I didn't clap for you," he replied. "I clapped for that little girl you used to be." Naomi swallowed. They shared a quiet moment, one that didn't need explanation. When Naomi returned to her seat, her phone buzzed. Dozens of notifications, emails from executives, texts from board members, news alerts already breaking. Airline CEO denied boarding on own flight. Viral airport incident sparks industry reckoning, discrimination at the gate, caught on camera. Naomi locked the phone and set it aside. She wasn't interested in virality. She was interested in change. After landing, she didn't rush off the plane. She waited until the aisle cleared. As she stood, a young white man approached her hesitantly. "I just wanted to say," he began, "I was in line. I saw everything, and I didn't say anything." Naomi looked at him, calm but direct. "What will you do next time?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Speak up." She offered a small smile. Then this mattered. Outside the terminal, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Security formed a loose perimeter, but Naomi stopped before entering the car. She turned back toward the terminal doors, toward the space where it had all begun. "For anyone watching," she said clearly, "this wasn't about me being powerful. It was about what happens when someone thinks you aren't." Her voice didn't shake. Most people don't get a reveal. They don't get a moment where the world suddenly listens. That's why systems, not individuals, must change. She stepped into the car. As it pulled away, inside the terminal, a new supervisor took position at gate B17. She adjusted her badge, took a breath, and watched the boarding line carefully. This time, her eyes didn't judge. They verified. Above the gate, the airline slogan glowed brightly. "We fly everyone." For the first time that day, it almost felt true. That night, long after the cameras had gone dark and the hashtags stopped climbing, Naomi sat alone in her hotel room. The city lights outside the window shimmered like distant stars, indifferent to everything that had happened earlier that day. From 35,000 feet, the world had looked small. From here, it felt heavy again. She removed her blazer and placed it carefully over the back of a chair. On the desk lay her laptop, unopened. She already knew what waited inside: statements to approve, calls to return, reputations to manage. But instead, she picked up her phone and opened an old photo. Her mother stood in the frame, smiling proudly, one arm around a teenage Naomi at an airport gate decades earlier. Economy class, middle seats, long layover. Her mother had whispered, "One day, they won't be able to question your presence." Naomi had believed her. Today proved how wrong and how right that statement was. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Human Resources. "Employee suspended pending investigation. Mandatory bias audit scheduled. External oversight confirmed." Not symbolic, structural. Naomi exhaled slowly. Across the country, in a modest apartment, Karen Whitmore sat on the edge of her bed, uniform folded beside her. For the first time in years, silence filled the space where authority had lived. She replayed the moment again, and again: the hesitation, the assumption, the confidence that she had been right, and the realization that followed. For the first time, she didn't feel attacked. She felt exposed. Back at the airport the next morning, a young black girl stood in line with her mother, clutching a stuffed bear. She watched first-class passengers board, eyes wide with curiosity. When the boarding agent smiled at her and waved them forward, the girl smiled back, unaware that anything else had ever been possible. That was the quiet victory. Not headlines, not applause, but the absence of harm. Weeks later, Naomi stood before a room of executives and staff. "No cameras, no scripts. Policies matter," she said, "but culture decides how they're used." No one interrupted. "Bias doesn't always look like hate," Naomi continued. "Sometimes it looks like certainty, like confidence without curiosity." She closed her folder. And that's the most dangerous kind. As the meeting ended, employees didn't rush out. They stayed, they talked, they asked questions they'd never asked before. Outside, planes took off and landed in steady rhythm. People boarding, people arriving, people belonging. Naomi watched from the window as another flight departed, disappearing into the clouds. This time, she didn't wonder who would be questioned. She knew the system was finally learning how to answer.